The first thing I tasted was sugar. Sweet, thick frosting pressed against my lips while laughter burst around me like fireworks. For a moment I couldn't see. Pink buttercream slid down my cheek and into my eyelashes, and the room blurred into colors and shapes. Someone's phone camera flashed. Someone else. And then I heard Jade's voice. Oh my God, look at her face. More laughter. Not the warm kind you hear at family dinners. This was sharp, cutting. The kind meant to make someone small. I stood there, frozen in the middle of the dining room. I had spent all afternoon decorating. Balloons hung from the chandelier. Gold streamers curled along the walls. The cake, what was left of it, sat crooked on the table, one side completely destroyed. Garrett's 30th birthday cake, the cake I had ordered, picked up, and carefully carried home like it was made of glass. Now half of it was smeared across my face, and everyone was watching. Garrett's sister Jade stood in front of me, still holding the plastic cake knife like a trophy. Her glossy hair fell perfectly over one shoulder, her phone propped in her other hand so the camera could capture my humiliation from the right angle. She was smiling. Her brother Caleb leaned back against the wall, clapping slowly like he was watching a comedy show. Classic, he said. Absolutely classic. Someone snorted. And Garrett, my husband of 3 years, he didn't move. He stood near the kitchen doorway with a drink in his hand, smiling in that uncomfortable, half-amused way he always did when his family crossed a line. Come on, Paige, he said lightly. Relax, it's a joke. A joke. Frosting slid down my chin and dripped onto the floor. The room smelled like vanilla and champagne, and something inside me finally went quiet. Not angry, not even hurt, just quiet. I looked at Garrett, then at his mother, Brenda, sitting at the head of the table with her arms folded like a queen observing court entertainment. Brenda Slate, retired federal judge. Local celebrity, the kind of woman who never raised her voice because she never had to. Her eyes met mine, cool and measured. Don't be dramatic, she said calmly. It's only cake. That was the moment I realized something. Not that they disliked me. I had known that for years. But this was different. They enjoyed it. The humiliation, the little tests, the constant reminders that I didn't belong. And suddenly I felt very tired. So instead of arguing, instead of crying, instead of begging my husband, again, to defend me, I simply reached for a napkin, wiped the frost, set the napkin on the table, and walked out. No one followed me. 3 years earlier, I had believed I was the luckiest woman in the world. Garrett Slate was charming in that easy, effortless way that made people trust him immediately. He had warm brown eyes, a crooked smile, and the kind of quiet confidence that made you feel safe. We met at a marketing conference in Chicago. I was presenting a campaign strategy for a retail client. He was there representing a consulting firm. After my presentation, he approached me with a thoughtful question about brand positioning. We talked for almost an hour. At one point he said, most people in this industry talk like they're reading from a script. You actually sound like you believe what you're saying. I laughed. I do believe it. That's rare. That was the first compliment he ever gave me. It felt sincere. Looking back now, I realize sincerity can be very convincing when you want to believe it. Our relationship moved quickly. Garrett introduced me to his family within 6 months. I remember the first dinner at Brenda's house vividly. Her home was immaculate, dark wood floors polished like mirrors, crystal glasses arranged with mathematical precision. Brenda greeted me with a polite smile. Paige, she said, shaking my hand instead of hugging me. Garrett tells us you work in marketing. I'm a senior strategist at Dalmar and Finch, I explained. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Ah, advertising. The way she said the word made it sound like something sticky, like gum under a shoe. Then Jade appeared. She was already building her social media following at the time. Fashion videos, lifestyle vlogs, curated glimpses of luxury. Garrett didn't mention you were pretty, she said, tilting her head. That's surprising. It sounded like a compliment, but it wasn't. Caleb arrived last. He was in law school then, tall and restless with the kind of humor that always landed 1 inch too sharp. He shook my hand and said, Well, this should be interesting. I asked him what he meant. He grinned. You'll see. At the time, I thought they were just protective. Every family has its quirks. Every new partner has to earn their place. That's what Garrett told me later when I admitted the dinner had felt uncomfortable. They're intense, he said, pulling me into a hug. But once they warm up to you, they're great. I believed him. Because loving someone sometimes means trusting their version of reality. The small things started soon after we got engaged. Little comments, little jokes, Brenda correcting the way I set the table, Jade posting subtle digs online. When some people marry into class, Caleb calling me the marketing girl instead of my name. And whenever I told Garrett it bothered me, he'd sigh. Paige, he'd say gently, you're being too sensitive. The first time he said it, I apologized. The second time, I tried harder. By the third year, I had stopped expecting him to defend me. Sedges. But I still didn't understand how deep the problem really was. Not until the morning after the birthday party, that morning, when I opened Garrett's laptop and found the folder. The morning after Garrett's birthday party, the house felt strangely quiet, not peaceful quiet. The kind that feels heavy. Like I woke before the sun had fully risen. My head ached slightly, not from alcohol. I hadn't touched a single glass the night before, but from the weight of everything I hadn't said. Garrett was still asleep beside me. He slept deeply. One arm stretched across the bed like nothing unusual had happened. Like frosting hadn't been smeared across my face while his family laughed. I watched him for a moment. His breathing was slow, steady, and I wondered something I had never really allowed myself to wonder before. Does he actually see what they do to me? Or worse, does he see it and simply choose not to care? I slipped quietly out of bed and padded down the hallway. The house smelled faintly of vanilla frosting and stale champagne. The dining room still looked like the aftermath of a celebration no one had bothered to clean up. Gold streamers sagged from the walls. Paper plates stacked crookedly near the sink. The ruined cake still sat on the table, its pink frosting hardened overnight. For a moment I stared at it. Then I picked up the plate and dropped the whole thing into the trash. Something about that small act felt final. I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen island, trying to think about work. I had meetings scheduled later that morning, a product launch campaign waiting for approval, normal life. Routine, but my mind kept drifting back to the way Jade had laughed, to the way Brenda had said, "Don't be dramatic," to the way Garrett had stood there holding his drink. Tama pem and Tom about of Tama pattern into me. I finished my coffee and decided to check my email before the day started. Garrett's laptop was on the living room desk. Mine had died the night before, and I hadn't bothered plugging it in, so I opened his. It wasn't unusual for us to use each other's devices. At least, it hadn't been unusual. Garrett rarely hid things, or maybe I had simply never looked closely enough. The screen lit up, and I logged into my email through the browser. But when the email loaded, something caught my eye. A folder on the desktop, plain gray, no label, just a string of numbers as its name. I probably wouldn't have thought twice about it, except the folder had been opened recently. The timestamp read 11:48 p.m., while the party was still happening. Something about that bothered me in a quiet, nagging way. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the memory of Garrett disappearing into his office for 15 minutes during the party. At the time, I had assumed he was answering a work call. Now I wasn't so sure. I stared at the folder for a long moment. Then I clicked it. Inside were several subfolders, one labeled legal, one labeled financials, and one labeled simply recordings. A strange chill crept up my arms. I opened the legal folder first. Documents filled the screen, PDFs, scanned forms, contracts. At first glance, they looked like standard financial paperwork. Trust documents, investment statements. Paige Donovan's slate. My stomach tightened. I opened the file. It was a prenuptial agreement, except it wasn't the one I had signed 3 years earlier. The language looked similar, but the clauses were different. Much different. Paragraphs about asset control, financial liability, inheritance restrictions. And at the bottom, my signature. or something that looked very much like it, my chest went cold. Because I knew, with absolute certainty, I had never signed this version. My hand trembled slightly as I scrolled. The document had been dated 6 months ago. 6 months. I sat there staring at the screen, my heart beginning to beat faster. Maybe there was some explanation. Maybe it was a draft. Maybe then I noticed another file. Prenup Amendment Final, PDF. I opened it. The signature was there again. My name written in careful cursive. My maybe papal cursive. Except the signature wasn't quite right. It looked copied. Like someone had traced it. And suddenly a memory surfaced. 6 months ago, Garrett had asked me to sign a birthday card for his mother. Write it nice and big, he had said. She likes sentimental things. I had laughed and scribbled my name across the inside. I felt sick. I closed the document and leaned back in the chair. The house was still silent. Garrett was still asleep down the hall. And on his laptop there were dozens more files. Financial records, trust agreements, family asset transfers. Financials. Inside were spreadsheets listing properties, investments, and accounts. Most of them belonged to Brenda, some to Garrett, a few to Jade, but the strange part wasn't the money, it was the notes. Short comments written beside certain entries, things like, "Mole, keep this separate from Paige," or "transfer before she notices." My hands had started to shake, and then I opened the last folder. Recordings. At first I thought they were voice memos, but when I clicked one, a familiar voice filled the quiet room, Brenda's. Calm, precise. "Garrett needs to finalize the amendment before the end of the quarter." Another voice responded. "Jade, I still don't understand why you let him marry her in the first place." A pause. Then Kaylig chuckled. "Because it's easier to control someone who thinks they're loved." The room seemed to tilt. My throat went dry as the recording continued. Brenda again. "Once the assets are secured, the divorce will be simple. Paige will walk away with nothing." Another pause. Then Garrett's voice. Quiet, resigned. "I know." And in that moment, sitting alone at the kitchen table with the morning sun creeping through the windows, I realized something terrible. The humiliation, the jokes, the cruelty. It hadn't been random. It had been deliberate. A strategy. 3 years of quiet manipulation designed to make sure that if this marriage ended, I would leave with nothing. Not financial security. Nothing. The recording ended. The silence that followed felt enormous. I closed the laptop slowly, and for a long time, I simply sat there, breathing, thinking, because in my line of work, marketing strategy, you learn something important. When people believe they thought they had already won. That morning, I decided not to confront Garrett. Not yet. Instead, I started making a plan. I didn't cry. People always assume that when you discover something like that, something that cracks your marriage open like a dropped plate, you collapse, you scream, you throw things. But the truth is, sometimes the shock is so deep it freezes you. I sat at the kitchen island, staring at the closed laptop while the coffee in my mug went cold. Garrett had known. That part echoed the loudest in my head. Not Brenda, not Jade, not Caleb. Garrett. Garrett. The man who used to hold my hand when we crossed busy streets. The man who kissed my forehead every morning before leaving for work. "I know," he had said on the recording. Just 2 words, but they hollowed something out inside me. After a while, I stood up, rinsed my coffee mug, and placed it carefully in the dishwasher. The small normal movements felt oddly important, like proof that the world hadn't completely tilted off its axis. From the bedroom, I heard Garrett stirring. A few seconds later, his voice drifted down the hallway. My heart gave a quiet thud. I walked back into the living room, my face calm, my hands steady. "Morning," I said. Garrett appeared in the hallway, rubbing his eyes. His hair was messy, his shirt wrinkled from sleep. For a moment, he looked exactly like the man I had fallen in love with. "Hey," he said softly. "About last night." He hesitated, like someone testing the temperature of water before stepping in. I waited. He sighed and leaned against the wall. "Jade went a little overboard. You know how she is." There it was, the familiar script, not an apology, Just a mild acknowledgement followed by an excuse. I studied his face. Did you think it was funny? I asked. Garrett looked uncomfortable. It was just a joke, Paige. Everyone was having a good time. Everyone. Except the person with cake sliding down her face. I nodded slowly, as if considering his words. I guess I did overreact, I said quietly. His shoulders relaxed immediately. That reaction told me something important. He expected me to apologize, expected me to smooth things over the way I always had. Garrett stepped forward and kissed my temple. See, that's why I love you. You're reasonable. Reasonable. I forced a small smile. Inside, something cold and sharp was beginning to take shape. Actually, I said lightly, I was thinking about last night. Oh, maybe we should have everyone over again. A proper dinner this time. Garrett blinked. A dinner. Yeah, no drama. Just reset things. He studied my face, searching for signs of lingering anger. I made sure there were none. Then he smiled. That's a great idea. Of course it was. Because Garrett thought reconciliation meant submission. And the Slate family, they had spent 3 years training me to play that role, the repentant wife. The overly sensitive outsider who always came back asking for forgiveness. That morning, I decided to give them exactly what they expected, just not for the reasons they thought. The first call I made after Garrett left for work wasn't to a friend. It was to a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. Not just any lawyer. A forensic financial attorney my firm had worked with during a corporate fraud investigation 2 years earlier. Her name was Lena Ortiz. She answered on the third ring. Paige Donovan, she said, recognizing my number immediately. This is unexpected. I need help, I said. My voice sounded calm. Is this business or personal? Both. There was a brief pause. All right, Lena said. That usually means it's serious. I told her everything. The folder, the forged signatures, the recordings. By the time I finished, my hands had started trembling again. Lena didn't speak for several seconds. Finally, she exhaled slowly. Paige, do you still have access to those files? Yes. Good. Don't touch them again yet. Why? Because if what you're describing is real, this isn't just divorce material. Her voice lowered. This could be fraud. Financial conspiracy. Possibly criminal. The word criminal hung in the air. Part of me wanted to shut the laptop and pretend none of it existed. But another part, the strategic, analytical part of my brain that had built million-dollar marketing campaigns, was already working. What should I do? I asked. Lena didn't hesitate. Document everything. That became the beginning of the next 2 weeks. 2 quiet, careful weeks. At home, I played the role Garrett expected. Gentle, agreeable, even apologetic. I texted Jade. I'm sorry I stormed out last night. I think we all got carried away. She responded with a laughing emoji and a... I called Brenda. I'd really like to repair things, I told her. Her voice was smooth with satisfaction. That's very mature of you, Paige. Caleb sent me a message later that day. Heard you're hosting another dinner. Brave move, I replied with a smiley face, all the while, I was collecting evidence. Lena connected me with a forensic accountant who helped me copy the financial documents safely. Another contact introduced me to an investigator who specialized in corporate fraud cases. And quietly, very quietly, I started recording things. Small digital recorders placed around the house. Another tucked into a decorative clock near the hallway. Each one carefully positioned. Each one legal, Lena assured me, because it was inside my own home. Garrett never noticed. None of them did. Because when people believe someone is weak, they stop looking for strength. By the end of the first week, I had hours of audio. Phone calls between Garrett and his mother. Conversations about money transfers, about trusts, about keeping Paige out of the loop. One night, while Garrett was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from Brenda lit up the screen. Make sure she signs the anniversary paperwork next month, Garrett replied seconds later. Don't worry, she will. I stared at those words, then quietly took a photograph of the screen. 2 weeks, that's how long I spent preparing. 2 weeks of smiles. 2 weeks of polite dinners. 2 weeks of pretending I was still the same woman who had wiped frosting from her eyes and walked away. And then I sent the invitation. Saturday night, reconciliation dinner. Brenda replied first. We'll be there, Jade commented with a champagne emoji. Caleb wrote this should be entertaining. Yes, I thought. It will be. The 2 weeks before that dinner were the longest of my life. Not because of fear, but because of patience. Patience is something people underestimate. They think strength is loud, arguments, slammed doors, dramatic ultimatums, but sometimes looks like silence. Like smiling across a dinner table while you quietly collect the truth. Garrett never noticed the difference. That might have been the most painful part. Every morning he kissed my forehead before leaving for work. Every evening he asked about my day with that same gentle tone he had always used. If he felt guilt, he hid it well. Or maybe the lies had simply become normal to him. One evening, about a week after I discovered the files, we were sitting on the couch watching television. The glow from the screen flickered across his face. Mom liked the idea of the dinner, he said casually. She thinks it's a good step. I nodded. That's good. Garrett glanced at me. You've been different lately. Different. I kept my eyes on the television. How? Genshikep. I don't know, he said slowly. Calmer. I almost laughed. Is that a bad thing? No, he said quickly. Actually, it's nice. The word sat strangely between us. Then he reached over and squeezed my hand. I know my family can be a lot sometimes. Sometimes. Garrett, I asked quietly, do you ever wish things were different with them? He hesitated. That hesitation told me more than any confession could have. They're my family, he said finally. It wasn't an answer, but it was enough. By the end of the second week, the evidence had grown. Overwhelming. Lena met me at a small cafe downtown, away from anyone who might recognize us. She spread printed documents across the table like puzzle pieces. Paige, she said carefully, this isn't just about a prenup. What do you mean? She tapped one of the financial records. These trusts. Says. They've been moving money between shell accounts for years. Is that illegal? Not necessarily, she said. But the way they're doing it, especially with forged documents, crosses into fraud territory. My stomach tightened, and Garrett. Lena looked at me with the kind of honesty you only get from professionals who deal with messy situations. He's involved, she said gently, even though I already knew it. Hearing someone else say it hurt in a new way. Lena continued, I've shared the preliminary information with a federal investigator I trust. They're interested. Interested how? In the way investigators get when they suspect financial crimes connected to large asset transfers. My heart thudded slowly. So what happens now? That depends on you. She leaned forward slightly. If you want to walk away quietly, we can use this evidence for a strong divorce settlement. And if I don't, then we document everything, she said. And we let the authorities decide. 3 years of humiliation, 3 years of being told I was too sensitive, 3 years of being the outsider at their table. And underneath all of it, they had been planning to strip me of everything. Not just dignity, my financial future, my security, my independence. A strange calm settled over me. Document everything. Lena nodded slowly. I thought you might say that. The final preparations for the dinner happened quietly. Garrett thought I was simply trying to impress his family. He watched me arrange the dining room with careful attention. Fresh flowers on the table, polished silverware, candles placed evenly between each setting. You're going all out, he said one afternoon. I smiled faintly. It's a special occasion. He racked his arms around me from behind. You're amazing, you know that. The words landed softly, but they felt hollow now. Still, I leaned into the embrace, played the part. Because sometimes the most effective strategy is letting people believe exactly what they want to believe. Saturday evening arrived. The house glowed with warm light from the dining room chandelier. Soft music played in the background. Everything looked peaceful, almost welcoming. The first to arrive was Caleb. He stepped through the door with a bottle of expensive wine and that same crooked grin. Well, he said, glancing around, This looks suspiciously civilized. Good to see you too, I replied calmly. He studied my face. You're taking the whole cake incident pretty well. I've had time to think about it. Dangerous thing, he said lightly. Thinking. I smiled. Yes, it can be. Next came Jade. She breezed in wearing a tailored white blazer, phone already in her hand. Paige, she sang. Look at you hosting again. Her eyes scanned the room like a critic evaluating a restaurant. Cute setup, thank you. She leaned closer and whispered conspiratorially. Don't worry about the video from the party. I didn't post the cake part. How considerate. Oh, please, she laughed. I'm not cruel. I met her gaze evenly. No, I said softly. Of course not. Then Brenda arrived. She walked into the house like she always did, straight, backed, composed, her presence filling the room with quiet authority. Paige, she said with a polite nod. Brenda, she glanced around approvingly. You've done a lovely job tonight. Thank you. Garrett arrived last, coming home from work just minutes before dinner. He kissed my cheek. Everyone's here. Yes, I said. My voice sounded steady, calm, exactly the way I wanted it to. Because the stage was set, the cameras were recording, and the truth was about to introduce itself. Dinner began exactly the way Brenda liked it. Controlled, predictable, civil. The four of them sat around the table while candlelight reflected off the crystal glasses. The smell of roasted chicken and rosemary filled the room, and soft jazz hummed quietly in the background. To anyone looking through the windows, it probably looked like a perfectly normal family gathering. Garrett sat at the head of the table, Brenda to his right, Jade across from her, Caleb leaning comfortably back in his chair, swirling wine in his glass, and me, at the far end, serving plates. Playing the role they had written for me. Caleb took the first bite of chicken and nodded. Not bad, Paige, he said. You might survive the family after all. Jade laughed lightly. Careful, Caleb. Compliments might go to her head. Garrett chuckled. I smiled politely and poured more wine. Inside, my pulse beat steadily, like a clock counting down. Brenda folded her napkin neatly beside her plate. I must say, she said, I'm pleased you decided to host this evening. I tilted my head slightly. Why is that? Because reconciliation requires humility. The word hung in the air, as if the past 3 years had been some kind of test I had nearly failed. Garrett nodded slightly beside her. She's right, Paige. Families have disagreements. The important thing is moving forward. I looked at each of them slowly. Brenda's composed expression, Jade's bored amusement, Khaled's restless smirk, Garrett's mild, reassuring smile. They all believed the same thing, that I had invited them here to apologize, that tonight was about restoring order. They had no idea what was about to happen. I set my wine glass down. You're right, I said softly. Brenda's eyes flickered with satisfaction. I'm glad you understand that. Oh, I do, I replied. Then I stood up. Garrett frowned slightly. Paige, before dessert, I said calmly, there's something I'd like everyone to hear. Caleb groaned dramatically. Please don't tell me this is a speech. It's not, I said. I walked to the side table where a small black speaker sat between the flower arrangements. None of them had noticed it earlier. I picked up a remote and pressed play. For a second, nothing happened. Then Brenda's voice filled the room. Clear, unmistakable. Garrett needs to finalize the amendment before the end of the quarter. The effect was immediate. Jade froze. Caleb's smirk vanished. Garrett sat upright. What is that? He said sharply. I didn't answer. The recording continued. Jade's voice followed. I still don't understand why you let him marry her in the first place. Then Caleb? Because it's easier to control someone who thinks they're loved. A glass clinked loudly against the table as Jade's hand trembled. Paige, Garrett said, his voice tight. Turn that off. I looked at him calmly. Why? His jaw clenched. That's private. The recording kept playing. Brenda again. Once the assets are secured, the divorce will be simple. Paige will walk away with nothing. Silence swallowed the room. Then Garrett's voice echoed through the speaker. Quiet. Resigned. I know. No one moved. The only sound was the soft crackle of the recording ending. I pressed pause and looked at them. Caleb spoke first. Where did you get that? His voice had lost its humor. I walked back toward the table slowly. From Garrett's laptop. Garrett stood abruptly. You had no right to go through my files. No right, I repeated softly. Brenda's face had gone pale, but her voice remained cold. This is a violation of privacy. I met her gaze evenly. You forged my signature on legal documents. That's an accusation. No, I said quietly. It's evidence. Jade suddenly pushed her chair back. This is insane. You're twisting. I tilted my head. Am I? Then I pressed play again. A different recording filled the room. Garrett's voice this time, from a phone call. Don't worry, Mom. She'll sign the anniversary paperwork. Brenda responded calmly. Good. Once that's done, we can move the final assets. Garrett's face had turned gray. You recorded my calls. I documented my marriage, I replied. Caleb let out a harsh laugh. Jesus, Paige, you've been spying on us. I looked at him. No, Caleb. I've been protecting myself. Brenda stood slowly from her chair. Her composure was cracking now, tiny fractures spreading through her calm exterior. You think this proves anything? She said sharply. I know it does. You're being hysterical. The word echoed through the room. Hysterical. The same word she had used when I cried after Jade mocked my job 2 years ago. The same word she used when I tried to explain how their jokes hurt. Something quiet and firm rose inside me. No, I said gently. I'm being prepared. And then the front door opened. Footsteps entered the hallway. Garrett turned sharply. What the hell? 2 men in dark suits stepped into the dining room. I'm Commander Demet. Behind them stood Lena, and another man holding a leather briefcase. He looked around the table calmly before speaking. Good evening. Brenda's face drained of color. Who are you? The man reached into his jacket and showed a badge. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The room fell completely silent. 3 years of quiet humiliation finally ended. For a moment, no one spoke. The kind of silence that fills a room when reality suddenly changes shape. Garrett looked from the agents to me and back again, his face pale in a way I had never seen before. This is ridiculous, he said finally, his voice strained. There must be some mistake. The taller of the 2 agents stepped forward calmly. There's no mistake, Mr. Slate. He placed a folder on the dining table, the same table where we had just been eating dinner minutes earlier. The contrast felt surreal. Roasted chicken, crystal glasses, and now, a federal investigation. Brenda recovered first. She always did. Her spine straightened, and the familiar authority returned to her voice. I am a retired federal judge, she said sharply. If you believe you can walk into my home, the second agent interrupted her politely. Ma'am, this is not your home. That stopped her. The man opened the folder. We've received documentation suggesting financial fraud, falsified legal documents, and asset concealment involving several family trusts. Jade laughed nervously. Oh my God, this is insane. Paige, did you seriously call the FBI over some family argument? I didn't respond. The recordings Paige obtained were reviewed by legal counsel, she said calmly. They were also provided to federal investigators along with financial records. Garrett stared at me like he didn't recognize the person standing across the room. You did this, he whispered. I held his gaze. No, Garrett, I said quietly. The taller agent began removing papers from the folder. Mrs. Brenda Slate, he said, we need to ask you several questions regarding the management of the Slate Family Trust and the amendment documents signed in the past 12 months. Brenda didn't move. Her face had gone perfectly still. This is harassment, she said slowly. Perhaps, the agent replied. But the forged signature on the prenuptial amendment suggests otherwise. Jade turned sharply toward Garrett. Forged signature. Garrett's mouth opened, but no words came out. Caleb leaned forward, his voice suddenly tight. Wait, you're saying Paige didn't sign that? I watched the realization spread across his face like a crack through glass. Brenda spoke again, but now there was tension beneath her control. This conversation should happen with legal representation present. That's fine, the agent said calmly. You're welcome to contact an attorney. Then he added something that made the air in the room grow. However, you should know that the financial transfers connected to these trusts involve several shell accounts currently under review for fraud. Jade's phone slipped from her hand and clattered onto the floor. This is insane, she whispered. Caleb rubbed his forehead. Mom, what did you do? Brenda turned on him sharply. Meg, I did what was necessary to protect this family. Her eyes flicked briefly toward me. From outsiders. The word stung less than it used to, because now it sounded small, desperate. The second agent closed the folder. We'll need access to several of your financial records immediately, he said. This has gone too far. His voice cracked slightly as he looked at me. Paige, whatever you think is happening, we can fix this. Fix. The same word he always used when something broke. Except some things don't get fixed. Some things get revealed. I folded my hands calmly in front of me. You had 3 years to fix it. Garrett's shoulders sagged. For the first time since I met him, he looked genuinely lost. The agents stayed for almost an hour. They asked questions, requested documents, explained procedures. Brenda eventually called her attorney, but even that conversation sounded different. Caleb barely spoke during the entire exchange. He sat at the table staring at the wood grain like he was trying to read something hidden there. Jade paced near the window, whispering frantically into her phone. I caught fragments of her conversation. This can't be public. No, don't post anything. Yes, I know the sponsors will panic. Garrett remained silent, watching everything unfold, watching the life he thought he controlled slowly unravel. When the agents finally prepared to leave, the taller one turned to me. Ms. Donovan, he said respectfully. Thank you for your cooperation. I nodded. Behind him, Brenda's eyes burned into me. You think you've won, she said quietly. I met her gaze. No, I replied. I think the truth finally arrived. She shook her head slightly. You'll regret this. But her voice lacked the certainty it once had. The agents left. Lena gave me a small, reassuring nod before following them out. And suddenly, it was just the 5 of us again. The same family that had sat down to dinner an hour earlier. Only now the illusion had disappeared. Garrett looked at the floor. Caleb leaned back in his chair like the weight of the room had doubled. Jade stood frozen by the window. And Brenda stared at me like she was seeing an entirely different person. Then she did something none of us expected. She stepped forward. Fast, before anyone could react. Her hand struck my face. The sound echoed sharply through the dining room. For a second, no one moved. The sting spread across my cheek, warm, sharp, but I didn't raise my hand to touch it, because I already knew something Brenda didn't. Every camera in the house had captured it. Garrett grabbed his mother's arm. Mom, stop. But it was too late. Very quietly, I turned toward the bookshelf where one of the hidden cameras sat inside a decorative clock. And I smiled. Not out of cruelty. Not out of revenge. But out of something much calmer. Justice. 6 months is a strange amount of time. Long enough for chaos to settle. Short enough that the memories still feel close. In those 6 months, everything changed. And yet, my mornings became surprisingly peaceful. The first morning in my new apartment, I woke to the sound of sunlight touching the window. No tension in the house. No careful silence. No quiet dread about who might say something cruel. Just the soft hum of the city waking up. I made coffee, stood by the window, and watched people walking their dogs below. It felt unfamiliar. Like learning how to breathe again after years of shallow breaths. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. When the agents reviewed the evidence Lena had gathered, the forged documents, the financial transfers, the recordings, they didn't just see a messy family dispute. They saw a pattern of fraud that stretched further than even I had imagined. Brenda Slate, the respected retired judge who had once intimidated entire courtrooms with a single glance, was formally charged with multiple counts of financial fraud and document falsification. The news hit the local media within days. Headlines appeared everywhere, not loud, sensational headlines, but quiet, devastating ones. For her reputation, the thing she had guarded more fiercely than anything, began to collapse almost immediately. The legal community she had once commanded with effortless authority now studied her case with careful distance. The woman who used to speak about justice on panels and legal conferences now sat across from prosecutors explaining her own decisions. Jade's world unraveled even faster. Influencer careers depend on perception, on image, and nothing destroys an image quicker than scandal. The video from Garrett's birthday party surfaced online a few weeks after the investigation began. Someone who had been at the party, one of Jade's own friends, posted it anonymously. The clip spread quickly, not because of the cake, but because of the laughter. The comments beneath it were brutal. Why would anyone treat their sister-in-law like that? This is bullying. That poor woman. Brand sponsors began quietly ending their contracts. Within 2 months, Jade's social media pages, once full of polished luxury content, had gone silent. Caleb's downfall was quieter, but just as real. Law schools have strict ethics policies, especially when financial fraud investigations are involved. His connection to the trust documents and recorded conversations triggered a discipline. By the end of the semester, he was expelled. I heard that news through Lena. She told me gently, as if worried I might feel guilty. But I didn't. Consequences are not cruelty. They are simply the weight of actions returning home. Garrett lost the most. Not just money. Not just reputation. But the quiet structure of the life he had assumed would always exist. When the financial investigation expanded, several of the family accounts were frozen. Properties tied to the trust were placed under legal review. The comfortable cushion Garrett had always relied on vanished. Our divorce was finalized 4 months after the dinner. The forged prenup amendments meant the original agreement was voided entirely. Garrett tried to speak to me once during the process. We met briefly in a quiet conference room at the law office. He looked thinner, older somehow. I never thought it would go this far, he said. I studied his face. You said you knew. He flinched slightly. I thought Mom was exaggerating, he said. I thought it was just paperwork. Paperwork that erased my rights. He didn't answer. After a long silence, he said something that surprised me. I did love you. The words hung between us. Once, they would have meant everything. Distant, like hearing a song you used to play years ago. I believe you, I said quietly. And strangely enough, I did. Love and weakness can live inside the same person. That doesn't excuse the damage, but it explains how it happens. Garrett looked down at his hands. I wish I had defended you. So do I said. Then I stood up, and that was the last time I saw him. My own life moved forward slowly, deliberately. I stayed at my job, focused on work again. The strategy projects that once felt stressful now felt grounding. There's something comforting about solving problems that don't involve betrayal. I also started writing, not publicly, just privately, documenting everything that had happened, every conversation, every moment I had ignored my own instincts, every small step that eventually led to that dinner table. People often ask how someone survives betrayal like that. The answer is simpler than it sounds. You stop trying to survive. You start building something new beside it, one honest day at a time. Sometimes I think back to that moment at the birthday party. Standing there with cake sliding down my face while everyone laughed. At the time, it felt like humiliation, but now I see it differently. That moment was the last time they ever controlled the story. Because the next morning,